Hello and welcome back to our series of lectures on the respiratory system. In this video, we are going to be talking about compliance, elastance, and lung surfactant. Okay, so let's start just with these definitions, okay? So compliance is basically the ability of the lungs to stretch. The easier it is to stretch your lungs outwards, the more compliant it is, okay? Elastance is kind of the opposite. So it's the ability of the lungs to spring back after they're stretched. Okay, so that's not the same as compliance. Okay, and also just kind of to think about this, basically the lungs are going to need to be compliant to be able to fill with air, right? So compliance is important for filling the lungs with air, whereas elastance is important for the ability of the lungs to empty, okay? So we're gonna do this little exercise here to make sure that you understand these concepts. What I'd like you to do right now is to take a moment, take a look at this list of items and determine whether they are high compliance or high elastance. So go ahead and hit pause if you need to, and then we'll go over it. Okay, so let's go over these. Bubblegum is high compliance. It's easy to stretch outwards. A balloon is going to be high elastance. It springs back easily, okay? Waistband of your new gym shorts is going to be high elastance, right? So it's a little hard to stretch initially and it'll spring back easily. The waistband of your old gym shorts is going to be high compliance. It stretches outwards easily, and then since it's lost its elastance, it's not going to spring back very easily. So hopefully you understand that concept. Now let's move on and talk about lung surfactant, okay? So lung surfactant is a substance that plays a big role in determining the compliance of the lungs, okay? So just to orient you to this picture right here, these large blue kind of bubbly, circly looking things are meant to represent alveoli, okay? And then on the inside of them, you can see these dark little purple circles. Those are meant to represent lung surfactant, okay? So let's tell you a little bit about lung surfactant, okay? Lung surfactant is a substance that lines the insides of your alveoli. It's made up of proteins and phospholipids, okay? You may remember from our first lecture on the respiratory system that lung surfactant is produced by the type 2 alveolar cells. Remember, we have about 5% of the cells in our lungs are type 2 alveolar cells, okay? And then finally, as I made reference to, lung surfactant is going to increase lung compliance, okay? So let's talk about how that happens. How does lung surfactant increase lung compliance? Okay, so first off, we're going to start by talking about surface tension and its role in alveoli, okay? So these are our pictures of alveoli. I want to start by telling you that the inner surface of each alveolus, okay, alveolus is singular of alveoli, the inner surface of each alveolus is coated with saline, okay? And that saline has surface tension, okay? And that surface tension is going to exert an inward pressure on the alveoli. So it's going to give them a tendency to collapse, okay? So a quick review question: what chemical phenomenon is responsible for surface tension? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that. Okay, so hopefully you remember surface tension is due to hydrogen bonding, okay? So the way that surfactant works is it basically kind of intersperses itself. The surfactant molecules intersperse themselves between basically the water molecules that make up the saline that lines the alveoli. And in so doing, it disrupts that hydrogen bonding that's happening between those molecules. When we disrupt that hydrogen bonding, we lessen the surface tension that is in that layer, okay? And then as a result of that, we relieve that inward pressure, okay? So thinking kind of more large scale, big picture again, basically what that does is it increases lung compliance. It makes it easier to stretch those alveoli open because you have less of that surface tension pulling inwards on the alveoli, okay? All right, so we just talked about surfactant and how it decreases surface tension in the alveoli and how that relieves inward pressure. Now let's take into consideration the size of the different alveoli in our lungs and take a look at the pressure there. Okay, so our lungs have different size alveoli, okay? And this law, the law of Laplace, describes the pressure exerted for a certain amount of surface tension for a sphere, basically, okay? So what I'd like you to do is take a look at these two different alveoli, okay? We're gonna assume that the surface tension is the same for the two alveoli, but then looking at this law, how does that affect the pressure, right? What does the pressure look like in these two alveoli? How does it compare? So if you need to, go ahead and hit pause now. Okay, so hopefully you figured out that with the smaller radius, okay, if you have a smaller radius, that's going to make your pressure bigger, okay? So your smaller alveolus is going to experience a higher inward pressure, making it more susceptible to collapse and more difficult to fill with air, right? So these small alveoli in our lungs are hard to fill with air and they collapse more easily. That's kind of a problem because we want to be able to use all of our alveoli, right? How can we solve that problem? Well, it turns out we have a very nice solution to this problem. The way we deal with this is that we put more surfactant. So we naturally put more surfactant into our smaller alveoli than into our larger alveoli. That way we end up equalizing the pressure across our alveoli so that they all have the same tendency. Basically, they all have the same compliance, okay? One last thing that I want to say about compliance and surfactant is this. I want to talk about premature babies. So you may be familiar with images of premature babies like this. You might have noticed that you always see them on ventilators, right? So these tubes lead to a ventilator. Why is that? That actually has to do with surfactant, okay? So premature babies, often they're born with insufficient levels of surfactant because they don't develop that ability until late in gestation, okay? So they're born with insufficient surfactant. As a result of that, it's harder, their alveoli are harder to fill with air than like a full-term baby, okay? And they collapse more easily, okay? So without that surfactant there, or without enough surfactant playing that role of increasing the compliance in our alveoli, in their alveoli, they need the help of a ventilator to breathe,